this video, we cover the following topics. The pigment name is the common name a manufacturer uses to identify a pigment. Manufacturers may call pigments anything they want for the purpose of branding, so the best way to determine what pigments make up a particular paint is to look at the ingredients or pigment list. Most reputable manufacturers for artist-grade materials will provide this information. On a tube of paint, look for the pigment ingredients list. This provides ingredients in order of predominance, from greatest to least. Next, we see the generic pigment name or what the pigment is called. Then you might notice the color index number, which is a color classification system for pigments and dyes used by professionals. For more information, see color-index.com. Finally, there are pigment codes. Watercolorists most commonly use the pigment codes to help identify the constituent pigments and their component parts. The pigment code is a combination of an abbreviation for the hue and a number that indicates the specific pigment used. The table on screen shows the abbreviations for each basic color. The pigment list contains pigment codes that identify the specific pigments used to manufacture a paint. Pro tip: look for pigment white, PW, in the ingredients list. PW is an opaque, chalky substance that makes watercolors less transparent and is often used as filler in cheaper sets. If a large number of paints include this ingredient, it may be a sign that a higher quality brand of paint should be selected. Manufacturers may combine pigments to create dupes or look-alike pigments, called a hue. However, typically, when a watercolor paint has the word hue on the label, it's an indication of a historical paint that has been replicated, which is no longer in use. Sometimes this is because of rarity or scarcity of the raw materials used to create the pigment. Other pigments may be unavailable because they are known to cause health issues. Sometimes paints are created with less expensive pigments to produce a color normally achieved with a more expensive pigment. This practice helps manufacturers to save money and is often done with student-grade paints. Now let's go over some basic paint properties. The transparency rating indicates whether a paint is transparent, translucent, or opaque in nature. Reputable manufacturers often include this information on the packaging and a legend or key to explain how to read the pigments. Staining is a property that indicates how well a pigment will lift from the surface of watercolor paper. When a pigment is staining, the pigment settles into the fibers of the paper and is more difficult to remove than non-staining pigments. Non-staining pigments can be easily lifted from the surface of the paper to reveal the white of the paper again. Manufacturers may provide information to indicate whether the pigment is naturally staining. Granulation occurs when a pigment has a natural tendency to clump together. Granulating paints are able to create textured effects effortlessly. Granulation is typically caused by coarse or unevenly ground pigments, but it may also be a characteristic of the pigment itself. This property may be indicated by some manufacturers with the letter G. However, not all manufacturers specify this information. Lightfastness is the permanence of a pigment or the measure of how well a paint resists fading when exposed to UV light, sunlight, for an extended period of time. If a pigment does not fade or change in sunlight, it's considered lightfast. If the pigment changes over time, it's considered fugitive. And these paints are not recommended for paintings where longevity is a desirable factor. Operas, matters, and neon pigments are typically fugitive. However, if the main intent of the painting is for illustration or digitization, then lightfastness and permanence may not be factors in purchasing decisions. Lightfastness is rated by the American Society for Testing and Materials or ASTM, which helps set industry standards for quality and safety of materials. The ASTM ratings are 1 excellent, 2 very good, 3 fair, 4 poor. And NR means that the lightfastness has not yet been rated by ASTM. To activate watercolors, simply add water. This allows the pigment particles in the binder to loosen and become suspended in the water for ease of use. This can be done with a paintbrush, eyedropper, pipette, or spray bottle. The purpose of activating the paints is to have them prepared for use. Watercolorists often wet or activate their paints before use. Pre-wetting helps to reconstitute dried pigments and suspends the particles of paint in the binder of gum arabic. Paints that have been pre-wet for a short period prior to use will be more concentrated. When watercolor paints haven't been activated with water, they will be less concentrated. This demonstration shows why watercolor paints, which aren't activated in advance, with water may look anemic and lack pigment. However, when watercolor paints are properly activated, they become richly pigmented and highly saturated in appearance. Depending on the setting, it may be prudent to selectively pre-wet colors. This is especially important when plein air painting. But in a studio setting, the whole palette could be spritzed to allow more freedom of color selection for the artist. I would like to introduce you to the 3-cup water navigation system. To use this system, first, clean your brush in the harbor or dirty container of water. This will remove most of the paint. Next, swish the brush in the filtering channel or rinse water container to remove any residual paint. Then, swirl it in the lagoon or clean water container. Finally, select a different paint with your clean brush. This is one of the best ways to change paints while maintaining color purity. Learning good habits when obtaining colors from your palette will help keep your colors bright, pure, and vibrant. Always use a clean brush to pick up new pigment or when changing colors. Clean the brush before obtaining a new color. Rinse brushes thoroughly at the end of each painting session to prevent unintentional color mixing when the brush is used next. Use the water navigation system to maintain pure water and reduce the chances of contamination. Always mix either on the paper or the palette, never where pure pigment is contained. Ensure that the palette is completely dry before closing the lid. Shutting the lid while it's still wet invites mold, mildew, and is a recipe for cross-contamination. Using these tips and best practices will instill these habits and ensure that your colors remain brilliant and your investment endures for years to come. Despite applying these practices, as a beginner it's likely that at some point contamination will occur. So it's important to know how to handle it when it does happen. This is what contaminated paints might look like, as well as a contaminated paint before and after a bird bath. Step 1. Dampen paints with a brush. Use a slightly damp brush with clean water to wet the surface of the paint that needs cleaned. Do not apply too much water or it may cause further mixing of the impurity into the paint. Remove too much water with an absorbent brush. Step 2. Rinse. Rinse the brush thoroughly in clean water, then blot the paintbrush on an absorbent material, like shop towels, to remove most of the water. Step 3. Repeat. Continue to repeat the process until the entirety of the impurity has been removed. Now we will look at basic grades of paint. The quality of paint is often categorized into grades, which indicate the overall quality and composition of the paint. Each grade signifies a level of quality that corresponds to different needs, skill levels, and budgets. Whether you're restocking your supplies or exploring new materials, it's important to consider what you already have, your financial plan, and where you are in your artistic journey. Beginners may find it more practical to start with lower-cost options that still offer decent quality, while more advanced artists might invest in higher-grade materials to match their expertise. Artist-grade paints are designed for professionals and artists who want their work to last. They typically feature high-quality pigments and a greater pigment load, with minimal use of fillers. Though more costly, the investment in professional-grade paints can significantly impact the quality and longevity of the artwork. Academy or student-grade paints are cost-effective options designed for beginners. They typically contain a higher proportion of brighteners and fillers to extend the pigments, resulting in a lower-quality paint compared to artist-grade paints. Despite this, they offer a good starting point for those new to painting, allowing for practice without a significant investment. Children's paint or craft paint are designed for casual use and play. These inexpensive options are accessible and easy to clean up, making them ideal for introducing children to painting. They often do not come with any information about the pigments contained in the paints, transparency, or light fastness. While not suited for serious artistic endeavors, they provide a fun and low-stress way to explore creativity. Handmade or handcrafted paints occupy a unique niche, often sought after for an artisanal touch. While these paints can offer exceptional quality, information on their properties and testing might be limited. Artists interested in handmade paints should research and test them to understand their characteristics. There are two traditional formats of paint. The first is tube paints, which are essentially liquid paint in a tube format. The second traditional format of paint is pan paints. Finally, I'd like to introduce what I call the novel formats of paint. Each format has a related in-depth video located in the playlist suggested at the end of this video. First up is watercolor markers. Second is watercolor crayons. Third is watercolor pencils. The fourth is liquid watercolors. Fifth is shimmering watercolors. The sixth is Gansai Tambi. And seventh is opaque watercolor. Comprehensive Watercolor, an interactive guide for learning to paint with watercolor, contains over 200 video lessons inside of the book. This enables you to watch, learn, and practice at your own pace. The book includes how to create 2 flip books and a palette card. Together, we explore and test watercolor paint properties. This innovative and practical method of teaching helps you learn watercolor one step at a time, and it covers everything you need to know to be successful with watercolor. My technique-focused method combined with a mix-and-match approach helps watercolorists at any stage of the painting journey improve their ability to paint subjects of their choice. The Ultimate Watercolor Product Guide covers virtually all the gear a watercolorist needs to begin a lifelong journey of watercolor painting and includes recommendations for gear like equipment, materials, supplies, tools, mixed media and more. This free guide accompanies the book, Comprehensive Watercolor, an interactive guide for learning to paint with watercolor. Download your free copy of the Ultimate Watercolor Product Guide today by clicking the link located in the video description below or visiting mandikins.com. Thank you for watching. Tap the archer to subscribe and the bell to be notified when I post new content. To continue your watercolor journey, click a video from one of the playlists above.